want to talk about an economic situation that is pretty damn rare and extremely challenging to solve that I feel could be coming our way, and that's stagflation.
Prices went up infamously during the Carter presidency.
Inflation was increasing and unemployment was increasing at the same time. That wasn't supposed to happen.
Good evening. Prices in the United States during the first 3 months of 1979 went up at an annual rate of 13%.
The question is, how long will this go on? Inflation running out of control. The answer? Probably for years.
Based on what I know, the makeup of stagflation is a very important economic condition, and to not have this sort of information or understanding is absolutely not an option. Because of its ability to impact everyone in such negative ways, I wanted to go over the causes of stagflation, whether stagflation is coming our way, and my overall perspective or opinion on it. So what is stagflation? Stagflation is a long period of extremely high inflation, a rise in the general prices of goods and services, mixed with a long period of slow economic growth. Basically, a decline of employment. In other words, less job opportunities for people. So if you're looking to cause harm on the lives of your everyday, regular, ordinary people, you would send in this guy.
Inflation is our friend.
Now, the reason stagflation is considered to be rare is because stagflation has only occurred a couple of times in history. One of the earliest records was in the UK in the 1920s and 1930s. Following that, in the 1970s in the US, UK, and many more European countries. And this was due to an increase in oil prices, other supply side disruptions, and monetary policy that led to higher inflation. Now, this was a terrible time for the people living in those countries, and a big reason why was because stagflation lasted for several years, which it tends to do when it occurs. And by that, I mean 8 to 10 years of having to pay higher prices for basic necessities during a time where unemployment was really high.
Over the next decade, the cost of living more than doubled. The dollar lost more than half its value.
A big reason to why stagflation tends to last a long time is because it is considered to be a very difficult situation for policymakers like governments and central banks to address. Since stagflation is a combination of little or no economic growth and high inflation, these issues are usually resolved through different policies like raising interest rates or controlling the overall money supply in order to control inflation or influence economic growth. So in a stagflationary environment, these tools are pretty much not effective because raising rates to combat inflation can further slow down economic growth, making it harder for people to get jobs, and lowering interest rates as a way to stimulate economic growth can worsen inflation. Therefore, policymakers like governments or the central bank face a challenging task when trying to address this issue. One of the primary causes of stagflation is a term called supply-side disruptions. And these are unexpected events that disrupt the overall production and supply of goods and services in the economy. This can be caused by a lot of different factors like war, natural disasters, and trade disruptions. Now, what I want to do is go a little more in depth with the current trade disruptions that we are currently starting to see or hear in the news, and that's China's, Russia's, Mexico's, and a handful of other countries plan to ditch the US dollar in international trade. And the reason this is important is because once countries stop using the US dollar, this could lead to higher import costs for the US, which in turn would contribute to our inflation problem, and that's because a weak dollar relative to other currencies would result in the demand for the American dollar to drop, making it more expensive to import goods from places like China and Mexico. Now, if this was to actually happen, this could get really ugly as the United States imports over $400 billion worth of goods from China and over $300 billion worth of goods comes from Mexico. Together, these two countries import about 1/3 of all the U.S. imports, which indicates that any changes to the U.S. trade relationships will have a huge impact on inflation and economic growth in the United States. Now, as higher import costs can cause inflation for the people, it can also lead to another cause of stagflation, a term called cost push inflation from the supply side. As import costs increase, this will naturally lead to increased production costs for businesses, leading to higher prices for consumers. And that's because businesses will increase prices in order to try and maintain their profit margins, which will then cause more inflation, and this ultimately could lead to a decrease in demand for those goods and services. As consumers are already struggling, they will for sure most likely decide to cut back or simply just not be able to afford anything at a big scale, and as the demand decreases, economic growth will follow. Finally, this will cause businesses to struggle to make sales, which will lead them to let go of more employees, leading to a continuous cycle of unemployment. Now, the other arguments for the causes of stagflation are high levels of government spending, which we already have seen and are still dealing with. And this was the printing of money and giving it out to the people in the form of stimulus checks, which caused an influx in the money supply. And as more money was available in the economy, this was a key driver to our current inflation issue. You could also blame the terrible policy mistakes by the central bank with their mixture of loose and tight monetary policies, which have led to inflation and a slowdown in economic growth.
Orchestrated inflation.
To protect the value of the dollar, Fed Chairman Bill Martin needed to raise interest rates, as he had done since 1951. But Lyndon Johnson was a different kind of president.
Johnson said, no, we don't want interest rates to rise. We don't want to derail the Great Society. We don't want to create a recession. We've got a war to fight. And the Fed caved in. And Arthur Burns, chairman of the Fed, he did not do what a good central banker should do and raise rates to break the inflation.
Now, the Fed was aware that it would almost certainly produce a recession. And Volcker says, I'm going to stick with my policy, even though the recession that begins in 1981 was the longest recession in post-war history.
Finally, the way I see it, and oddly, these causes are sort of similar to what happened in the 1970s. Central banks have pretty much kept interest rates real low prior to 2020, and this extended period of easy money could be said to have led to imbalances where demand was really high, which led employers to overhire. Now, the Fed's decision to tighten by raising interest rates or selling trillions of dollars worth of debt, ultimately taking money out of the economy, has led to less credit for businesses and consumers, thus leading to times of lower economic growth and the potential of the dollar no longer being the dominant currency for international trade. I believe an era of stagflation could be in our future. In fact, a lot of big banks are already positioned for the potential of stagflation. Some have already put out yearly insights on their website, and bank CEOs have already expressed their opinions. All right, guys, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video or made it to the end of the video, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you boys on the next one.